This week marks 5 years since the death of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist, U.S. resident, Washington Post columnist and vocal critic of the Saudi government. On October the 2nd, 2018, Khashoggi arrived at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on the advice of the Saudi government, hoping to receive the Saudi paperwork he needed to marry his fiancée. Instead, the Saudis murdered him and dismembered his body. And it was a shock felt around the world.
Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
الصحفي السعودي جمال خاشقجي.
El periodista disidente Jamal Khashoggi fue asesinado.
Jamal Khashoggi n'est jamais ressorti du consulat d'Istanbul.
Khashoggi sarebbe stato ucciso.
반체제 언론인 자말 카쇼기가 몸싸움을 하다 살해됐다고 이 사우디 검찰이 밝혔습니다.
Саудовского журналиста Джамаля Хашогги.
The missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi died during his visit to the country's consulate in Istanbul earlier this month.
In the weeks that followed, the story of Khashoggi's disappearance turned assassination was pieced together, one horrific revelation after another. The CIA quickly concluded the Saudi government, specifically Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, ordered Khashoggi's assassination. The US intelligence community would later find that the Crown Prince viewed Khashoggi as a threat to the kingdom and broadly supported using violent measures, if necessary, to silence him. Jamal Khashoggi's killing marked a critical shift in the world's view of the freshly crowned Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, who had been widely, if ludicrously, hailed as a promising new leader, a risk-taker who would restore peace to the Middle East, a millennial who would stand up for human rights, a reformer who would return Saudi Arabia to moderate Islam. Yet it had actually been clear for a while that MBS's leadership was on course to be none of that. It wasn't just the gruesome assassination of a prominent dissident on foreign soil. It was the brutal bombing campaign against the poorest country in the Middle East, Yemen. And while Donald Trump played protector to the young Crown Prince, bragging to journalist Bob Woodward how he saved MBS's behind, then candidate Joe Biden took to the debate stage in Atlanta a year after the murder of Khashoggi during the Democratic presidential primaries to make his own disgust for the Saudi government crystal clear.
Khashoggi was, in fact, murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince. And I would make it very clear, we were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are. There's very little social redeeming value in the present government in Saudi Arabia.
No more weapons sales. Pariah. Very little social redeeming value. So how do we get from that to this? Yes, President, no longer candidate, Joe Biden, last year, exchanging a fist bump with the Crown Prince on a visit to Saudi Arabia. And last month, doing the full handshake with the man who his own administration says ordered the barbaric murder of a US resident. But we're way past just fist bumps and handshakes. We're way past weapons sales, and the Biden administration has happily sold $4.7 billion of arms to the kingdom since taking office. We now appear to be on the brink of striking what's being called a mega deal with the Saudis. Yes, you heard that right. Over the summer, the foreign policy sage of the US press corps, the Middle East cab driver whisperer extraordinaire, Thomas Friedman, revealed in the New York Times how President Biden was seriously weighing a mutual security pact with Saudi Arabia, which would involve Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel, provided that Israel make concessions to the Palestinians that would preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. The Saudis, said Friedman, would also expect the U.S. to help deliver them a civil nuclear energy program. To be clear, if such a deal were to happen, it would be the first time the U.S. signed a mutual security pact with a non-democratic government since 1953. Last month, Friedman followed up on the news, praising the administration for taking on an issue he said more complicated and challenging than quantum mechanics. Quote, "The more I learn about the complex peace and security deal that the Biden team is trying to put together, the more I'm convinced that if they pull it off, they'll win both the Nobel Peace Prize and the Nobel Prize in Physics." Well, according to National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, the basic framework for an agreement is in place. And just last week, sources told Axios the White House Middle East czar, Brett McGurk, visited MBS in Saudi Arabia to discuss the mega deal. Look, it's difficult to overstate how big a deal a Saudi-US-Israel agreement would be. Mega may be an understatement. And yet, overwhelmed, as we have been here at home, by ongoing attacks on our democracy, multiple Trump trials, the GOP primaries, the impeachment inquiry, the shutdown, Hunter Biden, endless natural disasters, inflation, interest rate rises, Taylor Swift, Kevin McCarthy, and more. This story, this looming deal, has almost completely flown under the radar. It's not being debated in Congress or on cable news. The American public largely doesn't have a clue about it. And yet, in my view, we may be sleepwalking into the worst foreign policy agreement in decades, one that could cost American lives. Today, I'm going to explain why. But let's start by asking, why is this administration so keen to make such a deal with MBS's Saudi Arabia and with Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel in the first place? Why are so many very serious people in Washington, D.C. so very excited about such an agreement? Well, Mr. Foreign Policy over at the New York Times, Tom Friedman, says it would be a historic rapprochement between the Jewish state and the wider Muslim world. Quote, it would be a game changer for the Middle East, bigger than the Camp David peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Because peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the custodian of Islam's two holiest cities, Makkah and Medina, would open the way for peace between Israel and the whole Muslim world, including giant countries like Indonesia and maybe even Pakistan. Friedman adds, it would be a significant Biden foreign policy legacy. He also says the deal could have a moderating impact on Israel's far-right government. And Friedman is, in fact, channeling not just the views of the Saudi cab driver, but what the Biden administration itself is saying on the rare occasions it talks about these negotiations. Here was National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan giving his sunny outlook last week at the Atlantic Magazine's Ideas Festival.
The amount of time that I have to spend on crisis and conflict in the Middle East today compared to any of my predecessors going back to 9/11 is significantly reduced. So what are we trying to do with Saudi and Israel? Reinforce, deepen, and sustain that out into the future, because we believe that regional integration and normalization between significant countries in the Middle East can create a greater and more stable foundation as we go forward.
Other proponents of a deal say Biden's real target is not the Middle East, but America's top global competitor, China. That's the argument of Hussein Ibish, a scholar at the Saudi-funded Gulf States Institute in D.C. He writes in the New York Times that the main advantage the triangular deal offers the United States is a tightened grip over three vitally important waterways around the Arabian Peninsula. You see, China imports nearly half of its oil and a lot of its goods through those waterways. Such a pact, therefore, Ibish says, would undoubtedly ensure that Saudi Arabia's increasing flirtation with China never leads to a significant strategic foothold for Beijing in the kingdom. And, he adds, a US-Saudi pact could allow the United States to finally realize its long-standing goal of reducing some of its huge military bases in the Gulf region. Sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds almost like Vivek Ramaswamy constantly proclaiming that he'll wean Russia off of China by doing a deal with Putin. And apparently now, Biden will wean the Saudis off of China by doing a deal with MBS. But it's not that simple or easy. This isn't like playing a board game like Risk with friends in your living room, unless your friends include a theocratic royal ruler who's widely known as the Bonesaw Prince and a far-right prime minister facing trial for corruption. These are not serious diplomatic partners, and Biden is risking real disaster by courting them in this way. How? Well, first, let's take a closer look at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
Maybe you know them from the Gulf War, or 9/11, or the civil war in Yemen, or, of course, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The kingdom, whose state-sponsored television runs comedy sketches like this one depicting Biden as a doddering old fool. Yes, Mr. President, the Saudis are really big fans of yours. No, really. In fact, as former top U.S. diplomats Daniel C. Kurtzer and Aaron David Miller write in Foreign Affairs, it is a real stretch to describe Saudi Arabia as a U.S. ally. The Saudi government shares almost no values with that of the United States, least of all those related to democracy and freedom, and its interests clearly diverge from Washington's on human rights, oil pricing, and relations with China and Russia. So, given all that, given how unreliable, untrustworthy, and violent MBS and the Saudis have been, what is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia offering the US that we don't already have? Not much, to be honest. Recognizing Israel and its security needs? The Saudis actually already do that, unofficially. As Kurtzer and Miller note, Jerusalem and Riyadh maintain intelligence and security relationships, albeit undeclared ones. Multiple news reports, meanwhile, suggest that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in 2020 met in Saudi Arabia with MBS. And last month, Israel for the first time sent a government minister to the kingdom for a public visit. A second minister paid a visit this week. So don't believe the harsh rhetoric in public. Behind the scenes, the Saudis and the Israelis have been working together for years, and if those two countries want to get even closer publicly, they can do it without the US getting involved.
Make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
And by the way, can we stop calling this a peace deal? Because a peace deal is for when two countries are at war with one another, not when they're hosting each other's officials and sharing intel. In fact, the last time the Saudis and the Israelis met on a battlefield was 50 years ago. Now, the Saudis might say, well, this deal will get concessions from Israel for the Palestinians, so it will lead to Middle East peace. But we haven't had any specifics from the Saudis, or the Israelis for that matter. And more on that in a moment. How about cheaper oil, though? It'd be great for Biden if he could get a commitment on that, right? But Riyadh is rigging artificially high oil prices by restricting supply right now, just as they did in the lead up to the 2022 midterm elections, leading experts from think tanks like Brookings and Quincy to say MBS was putting his thumb on the scale of US elections in favor of the Republicans. And of course, the Saudis are much, much closer to the Trump family than they are to the Biden administration. $2 billion investment, anyone? It's not just Jared. The Donald himself, according to a New York state judge, bragged about the Saudis being willing to pay him any price he suggests for his properties, which the judge added suggests possible influence buying by the Saudis. Knowing all that, does MBS strike you as the kind of guy that wants to help out Joe Biden ahead of an election against Donald Trump? That he wants to listen to the US government on the direction of gas prices? Okay. What about getting the Saudis to do better on human rights in return for this mega deal? Say, I don't know, the Saudis stop gunning down migrants at their border or stop sentencing to death their own citizens for tweeting. Well, if you think Jared's pal MBS will agree to that, I have a $10 barrel of oil to sell you. So, just to repeat, we don't get cheaper gas or fewer executions from the Saudis, but they get a security pact, one that sounds more like a military rental agreement. As those former diplomats Daniel Kurtzer and Aaron Miller wrote, the Saudis are also likely to ask for a binding commitment from the United States to defend the kingdom with force if it comes under attack. Under no circumstances should the Biden administration make such a commitment. And yet, we might be about to. MBS, who loves to rattle his saber when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran, would clearly also love a personal insurance policy from the US Department of Defense. Which is crazy. As Middle East defense analyst Bilal Saab wrote in Foreign Policy last spring, Saudi Arabia is asking the US government to formally commit to Saudi security, something the United States does only with treaty allies, including NATO members. And you remember the whole thing about NATO, right? An attack on one is an attack on all. It's the reason that even possibly extending NATO membership to Ukraine is such a hotly contested issue right now. Because offering a blanket "we'll come to your defense no matter what" promise is the kind of thing that's triggered a world war before. Knowing all that, do we really think the public wants American troops obligated to act as royal guards for a theocratic monarchy that hasn't been afraid to get involved in wars in that region? A nation that gave us 15 of the 19 hijackers who attacked America on 9/11. A regime that helped lay the groundwork for the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban. Why would the United States put itself in the position where they must come to the military aid of a vicious, brutal regime, when currently we don't seem to even have the stomach to do that for a democracy that's being invaded by Russia?
Make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
But wait, there's more. Because this oil-rich nation reportedly also wants the US to give it nuclear energy. And that's not a new ask. According to the New York Times, the Saudis have pressed Washington to help it develop a nuclear energy program for years. So why hasn't it happened yet? Quote, because the Saudi government refuses to agree to conditions that are intended to prevent it from developing nuclear weapons or helping other nations do so, according to officials with knowledge of the discussions. That sounds bad. For their part, the Saudis continue to insist that any nuclear program would be purely civilian in nature. Except...
Are you concerned, though, Iran gets a nuclear weapon, about them getting a nuclear weapon?
Well, we are concerned of any country getting a nuclear weapon. That's a bad move.
If they get one, will you?
If they get one, we have to get one.
So give us nuclear energy, which we promise to use for peaceful purposes, unless we decide we have to turn it into nuclear weapons. Sounds great. Does Joe Biden really want to be remembered as the president who made nukes possible for the country, again, remember, that gave us 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11? And by the way, what do you think the Iranians will do with their nuclear program if we start giving the Saudis nuclear energy technology? It's a recipe for a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, which is partly why the Israelis haven't fully signed on to the terms of this mega deal yet, and why a bipartisan group of more than 24 experts petitioned Biden last month, urging him not to agree to any deal that gives the Saudis the ability to enrich uranium on their territory. Yes, a bipartisan group. Because for all the serious and dangerous divisions in America today, there is one thing a majority of Americans see eye to eye on, and it's not trusting Saudi Arabia. A Harris poll commissioned by the Quincy Institute in August asked Americans if they would favor or oppose a deal in which Saudi Arabia opened diplomatic relations with Israel in exchange for the U.S. committing American soldiers to defend Saudi Arabia in the event of a war. 55% said they would oppose it, to only 45% who would favor it, practically a landslide in terms of American public opinion in 2023. And that number was roughly the same across Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Here's the thing. Biden's own base in the Democratic Party aren't fans of the current Israeli government either. So why, oh why, is Joe Biden going out of his way to appease these two governments at this moment in time? In fact, let's talk about the current far-right Israeli government, the other party to this looming agreement. It's a government whose attack on the independence of the Israeli judiciary has led to hundreds of thousands of pro-democracy Israelis marching week after week in protest. An Israeli judiciary that is, by the way, currently trying Prime Minister Netanyahu for corruption charges. Now, President Biden has urged Netanyahu publicly and privately to drop the legislation weakening the country's Supreme Court. But the Prime Minister ignored those pleas and passed part of his controversial judiciary bill in July. Netanyahu also secured his premiership by agreeing to a coalition government with people like National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was previously convicted in an Israeli court of inciting racism. A guy who would go on to say this.
הזכות שלי, של אשתי, של הילדים שלי, להסתובב בכבישי יהודה ושומרון, יותר חשוב מזכות התנועה של הערבים. סליחה מוחמד, אבל זו המציאות, זו האמת, זכות החיים שלי קודמת לזכות בן גביר.
And Netanyahu actually defended those racist comments from Ben-Gvir. Meanwhile, in the past year, Israel has illegally displaced more than 1,100 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank. And last week, UN officials called for Israel to cease their settlement activities, citing their violations under international law for what is, I believe, the zillionth time. So, this is the moment Biden wants to reward and embolden the Netanyahu-Ben-Gvir government? This is the moment that Biden wants to offer unprecedented gifts to the Saudis, a mutual defense pact, nuclear energy, in return for a normalization of relations with Israel, which won't actually guarantee anything of substance for the Palestinians? Here's Netanyahu speaking at the UN General Assembly last month.
I've long sought to make peace with the Palestinians, but I also believed that we must not give the Palestinians a veto over new peace treaties with Arab states.
And surely it cannot be a great sign for Palestinians that the map Netanyahu held up during that speech, entitled The New Middle East, completely erases the Palestinian territories. It has just Israel. Oh, and by the way, let's say miraculously Israel were to agree to major and meaningful concessions to the Palestinians. Even then, if you believe that an Israel, run by Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right allies, would actually follow through on any meaningful post-deal concessions to the Palestinians, then boy, do I have an evacuated Israeli settlement to sell you. Look, don't get me wrong, I'm all for peace in the Middle East, but a real peace based on justice and equality, not a pretend peace based between autocrats and authoritarians who don't even speak for the people they claim to represent. Look at Donald Trump's Abraham Accords, for example, which this mega deal is supposed to be some kind of sequel to. Signed in 2020, those accords normalize relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, which quietly signed the agreement in 2021. And of course, the agreement was perceived as a huge diplomatic success. But at the time, polling in those countries, like Bahrain and the UAE, showed only lukewarm support for the agreement. Since then, public opinion has only gotten worse. The people on the ground want a real peace, not a pretend peace, a peace that doesn't throw Palestinians under the bus. The kind of peace that the Saudis were once in favor of. Because rather than Joe Biden suggesting he wants a deal with the Saudis and Israelis today centered around normalization in return for a defense pact and nuclear energy and some minor and probably imagined concessions to the Palestinians, and rather than Tom Friedman gushing about what a huge deal that would be if it happened, why not go back to Tom Friedman's own op-ed in The Times on February the 17th, 2002, in which he described a visit to the kingdom in which he, Friedman, met the then Saudi Crown Prince, MBS's late uncle Abdullah, who told him that he wanted to rally Arab nations around a position of, quote, full Israeli withdrawal from all the occupied territories in accord with UN resolutions, including in Jerusalem, for full normalization of relations. Now, that's a deal worth pushing for. The Saudi peace plan, also known as the Arab Peace Initiative, which was rejected in 2002 by Ariel Sharon's Israeli government and effectively ignored here by the Bush administration. A deal that would trade land for peace, not a deal that trades no land and no peace for nuclear energy and a mutual defense pact. I mean, come on. In what world does Joe Biden do this deal with the Saudis and then still go on about the great struggle of democracy versus autocracy? In what world does Joe Biden do this deal with the Israelis and then still go on about a two-state solution for the Palestinians? In what world does Joe Biden do a deal in which he blesses a nuclear energy program for the Crown Prince while then rejecting a deal on nuclear energy for the Ayatollah? This isn't just about our interests trumping our values. This so-called mega deal isn't in our interests or in line with our values. Look, I was in a tiny minority of journalists and pundits here in Washington, D.C., who praised President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in 2021 and end America's longest war. So how did Joe Biden go from making one of the best and boldest presidential foreign policy decisions of my lifetime to now pushing for one of the worst?